Poor young woman fainted in the bathroom, never imagining that the millionaire saw her. And if this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. Marina adjusted her improvised portfolio in her worn bag for the 10th time while observing her reflection in a closed shop window. The navy blue blazer bought at a thrift store the previous week had slightly too wide shoulders, but it was what she had managed to find within her tight budget. The shoes, also second-hand, pinched her feet with every step, but she refused to show any sign of discomfort. The Art Corp building rose imposingly before her, its mirrored walls reflecting the gray sky of Chicago. It was the type of building that seemed to have been built to intimidate people like her, born and raised in the outskirts of the city. Marina breathed deeply, clutching the strap of her bag with enough force to leave her knuckles white. This wasn't just another job interview. It was her last real chance to fulfill her dream of working with art. The clock showed 8:45, 15 minutes early, exactly as planned. Marina walked through the revolving doors and headed to the reception, where a woman with an austere expression looked at her over thin-framed glasses. "Marina Adams, I have an interview scheduled with Mr. Richard Miller at 9 a.m., she introduced herself, proud that her voice hadn't trembled. The receptionist consulted the computer with meticulous movements. "Yes, it's here, 15th floor, but—" she made a studied pause. "The elevator is under maintenance." Marina felt her stomach sink. 15 floors in heels, with her feet already hurting, but there was no alternative. "That's okay, I'll take the stairs." The climb was a test of physical and mental endurance. With each flight of stairs, Marina felt her heart beat stronger, partially from the physical effort, partially from the growing anxiety. Her drawings, her digital illustrations, all her work from the last few years was there in that improvised portfolio, printed on regular paper because she didn't have money for special prints. When she finally reached the 15th floor, Marina was breathless and could feel some drops of sweat running down her back. The clock in the hallway showed 9:10. Her heart froze. She was late. The secretary of the floor received her with a look that mixed pity and disapproval. "Miss Adams, Mr. Miller is very strict about schedules." "Please," Marina begged, trying to catch her breath. "The elevator is broken. I came up the stairs. If you could just explain—" "I'm sorry," the secretary interrupted her, her tone making it clear she wasn't sorry at all. "Mr. Miller has already determined the cancellation of the interview. Company policy." Marina felt as if all the air had been sucked from her lungs. Her legs, already shaky from the climb, threatened to give way. "There's no way to reschedule." "Unfortunately not. Mr. Miller's schedule is completely full for the next few months." The secretary had already turned her attention back to the computer, clearly considering the conversation over. Marina mumbled an automatic thank you and turned away, stumbling slightly. She needed to get out of there before the tears, already burning in her eyes, started to fall. In the hallway, she spotted a sign indicating the bathroom and practically ran there. Inside the luxurious bathroom, with its marble sinks and immense mirrors, Marina finally let the tears flow. She sat on the cold floor, leaning against the wall, and opened her portfolio one last time. The pages were slightly wrinkled at the edges, but the illustrations still conveyed all the passion and dedication she had invested in each stroke. One illustration in particular caught her attention. It was a watercolor portrait of her mother, made shortly before she passed away. The gentle smile, the kind eyes, the strength that emanated even amid the fragility. It was her best work, the one that carried the most emotion, the most truth. And now, like her mother, it seemed to be saying goodbye to yet another dream. Richard. Miller massaged his temples, trying to ward off the growing headache. The meeting with the shareholders had been dragging on for 2 hours, and the same discussions about goals and results were becoming unbearable. His coffee had gone cold long, and he could barely concentrate on the spreadsheets projected on the screen. "Excuse me," he murmured, rising abruptly. "I need a moment." No one dared to question his exit. After all, he was Richard Miller, the man who had transformed ArtCorp into one of the largest advertising agencies in the country, the creative genius who had abandoned his brushes to become a corporate magnate, the man who hadn't smiled in years. In the hallway, away from inquiring eyes, Richard loosened the Italian tie that seemed to suffocate him. His steps automatically led him to the men's room, his usual refuge during endless meetings. However, something made him stop before pushing the door. A muffled sound came from the bathroom next door. Crying. The kind of crying he knew well, contained, desperate, the sound of someone trying, not to be heard while their world falls apart. The door to the women's bathroom was slightly ajar, and through the gap, Richard saw something that made him freeze. A young woman sitting on the floor, surrounded by scattered sheets of paper. But they weren't just any papers, they were drawings. Illustrations that, even from that distance, emanated a familiar energy, a passion that he had long ago buried. Without thinking, he gently pushed the door. The young woman didn't notice his presence, absorbed in her moment of vulnerability. Richard silently crouched down and picked up one of the sheets that had slid near the entrance. The drawing in his hands hit him like a punch to the stomach. It was a watercolor portrait, so alive it seemed to breathe. The technique wasn't perfect. There were small technical errors here and there, but there was something more. Something he hadn't seen in years. Something that reminded him of his own works, stored and forgotten in his abandoned studio. The woman portrayed seemed strangely familiar to him, like an echo of a distant memory. Her eyes had an expression he knew that haunted him in his nightmares, eyes that reminded him of Helen. Richard felt his hands tremble. Helen, his fiancée, his muse, his greatest inspiration. The woman who departed too soon, taking with her his colors, his dreams, his ability to create. And now, in that cold bathroom of his company, he was holding a portrait that seemed to speak directly to his wounded soul. A louder sob from the young woman brought him back to reality. She still hadn't noticed him, lost in her own world of pain. Richard gently left the drawing on the floor and backed away, his mind working frantically. "Mr. Miller," his secretary's voice echoed through the hallway. "The meeting." "Cancel my afternoon appointments," he ordered, his voice hoarser than usual, "and bring me the file of the candidate who was scheduled for an interview this morning." "But sir, you yourself asked to cancel." "Now," he cut her off, his tone not admitting questions. Back in his office, Richard found the file on his desk. In minutes. Marina Adams, 23 years old, born and raised in the outskirts of Chicago, graduated in design with a full scholarship, exemplary grades, experience limited to freelance work, and an internship at a small agency. He picked up the phone and dialed the Human Resources Department. "I want you to contact Marina Adams, offer her an internship position in the creative department. No, it doesn't need to be paid initially. Just bring her back." Marina stared at the email on her cell phone for the 10th time, still not believing what she was reading. The message from the Human Resources Department of ArtCorp offered an internship position in the creative department starting the following week. It wasn't paid, but offered transportation and meal vouchers, enough for her to get by, especially if she continued with her freelance work in her spare time. "You're going to accept it, right?" her best friend Julia asked while serving more coffee in the worn-out cup. They were sitting in the small kitchen of the apartment they shared in the outskirts, where the smell of fresh coffee tried to mask the mold on the walls. "I don't know, Jules." Marina bit her lip, thoughtful. "After that whole disaster, them simply sending me this email, there's something strange. Strange is you still thinking about it. It's ArtCorp, Marina, the biggest agency in the country. Do you know how many portfolios they receive per day? If they're giving you this chance," Marina sighed, running her fingers along the chipped edge of the cup. "And how will I support myself without a salary? The same way you're doing now is with your freelance work, only now you'll have experience at ArtCorp on your resume. Think about it, this could open 1,000 doors." Julia's argument made sense. Marina looked at the kitchen wall, where she had hung some of her favorite illustrations. Among them, the portrait of her mother smiled serenely, as if encouraging her to make the decision. On the following Monday, Marina was back at the imposing art court building, this time wearing a simpler outfit but still presentable. The elevator was still under maintenance, but she had arrived 40 minutes early, determined not to be late again. Upon reaching the 15th floor, she was greeted by a woman different from the previous secretary. This one had a genuine smile and introduced herself as Claire, assistant to the creative department. "I'll show you everything," Claire said, guiding Marina through the corridors. "The people here are pretty nice, except for some dinosaurs, of course, but in general, if you do a good job, nobody bothers you." The creative department occupied half of the floor, with various workstations divided by low partitions. The walls were covered with posters of award-winning campaigns, and there was a vibrant energy in the air, even at that early hour. "This will be your desk," Claire indicated a station in the corner near the window. "We just updated all the computers, so you'll have access to the best programs." Mr. Miller, insisted that the creative department always have the most modern equipment. Marina arranged her things at the designated desk, still feeling as if she were in a dream. The computer was more powerful than any she had ever used, and there was a brand new graphics tablet waiting for her. "That's the boss's office," Claire pointed to a frosted glass door at the end of the hallway. "He rarely shows up here, preferring to stay on the top floor, but when he comes..." She lowered her voice to a whisper. "It's better if everyone is concentrated. He has eyes in the back of his head, I swear." The first few hours passed in a blur of introductions, forms to fill out, and instructions about company procedures. Marina observed everything with attention, determined not to make any mistakes. Her first task would be to assist in creating a campaign for a cosmetics brand. Nothing too complex, just some initial layout studies. During lunch, Claire invited her to eat in the company cafeteria. While they ate, Marina noticed a different movement among the employees, whispers, nervous glances toward the elevators. "What's happening?" she asked Claire. "The boss is in the building," Claire responded, unconsciously adjusting her hair. "Usually he only shows up for important meetings, but today..." Before she could complete the sentence, a sudden silence took over the cafeteria. Marina turned to see what had caused that reaction, and her heart stopped for a moment. Richard Miller had just entered the environment, his presence dominating the space like a magnetic field. Tall, elegant in his impeccable suit, he carried an aura of natural authority, but it was his eyes that captured Marina's attention, deep eyes marked by a sadness that no professional success seemed capable of erasing. For a brief moment, their gazes crossed. Marina felt a shiver run down her spine as she recognized the man who should have interviewed her on that fateful day. But there was something more in that look, something she couldn't decipher. A mixture of recognition and pain. The moment passed too quickly. Richard averted his gaze and continued on his way, stopping only to exchange a few words with one of the directors. Marina turned her attention back to her plate, but her mind was racing. Why did she have the feeling that there was more to this story than appeared? And why, even though they had never spoken, did she feel as if she already knew that sad look from somewhere in the past? Richard closed the door of his office on the top floor and loosened his tie, feeling the weight of the day on his shoulders. The image of the young intern in the cafeteria wouldn't leave his mind. There was something about her, something beyond the artistic talent he had glimpsed that day in the bathroom, something that deeply disturbed him. He walked to the large window that dominated an entire wall, observing the city that stretched to the horizon. Chicago, with its eternally gray sky, seemed to reflect his state of mind. 20 years had passed since he abandoned his brushes, since he transformed his pain into a corporate empire. 20 years trying to forget. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he ordered without turning around. "Mr. Miller," the voice of his personal assistant sounded hesitant. "I brought the reports you requested about the new intern." Richard turned slowly, taking the folder she extended. "Thank you, Beth. You may go." Alone again, he opened the folder and began to examine the documents with more attention than he had ever dedicated to any hire before. Marina Adams, born and raised in Evanston. Mother deceased when she was 15 years old. Father, unknown. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the page, and found an old photo attached to the file. It was a newspaper clipping from nearly 2 decades ago, showing a woman of serene appearance, the same one from the watercolor portrait he had seen in Marina's portfolio. The caption identified, "Helen Adams, promising plastic artist, departs prematurely, leaving a young daughter." Richard felt the air leave his lungs. Helen Adams, the name he had spent 20 years trying to forget, that haunted his dreams and destroyed his ability to create. Helen, his first student at the art college, his first true love before meeting Beth, his fiancée who had also departed too soon. But there was more, much more. Memories that he had buried deep in his mind began to emerge like bubbles in boiling water. Helen had been more than his student. She had been his confidant, his inspiration at a crucial moment in his career. And then, at that fateful exhibition, Richard closed the folder forcefully, as if he could thus contain the memories that threatened to overflow. He stood up abruptly and went to a discreet small bar in the corner of the office, serving himself a finger of whiskey. The amber liquid shone in the glass, like Helen's eyes on that last night. "Impossible," he murmured to himself. "It can't." Probably some wine, but it was. Marina wasn't just another talented young artist. She was Helen's daughter, the daughter of the woman who he... The sound of the phone yanked him from his dark thoughts. It was Claire from the creative department. "Mr. Miller, sorry to bother you, but the new intern, Marina Adams, she just presented some preliminary studies for the cosmetics campaign and, well, you need to see this." Richard closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of fate's irony. "Send it to my email," he instructed, his voice hoarser than normal. Minutes later, he was staring at his computer screen, where Marina's drawings shone with a force he hadn't seen in years. The technique was different from Helen's, more modern, more daring, but there was something there, something that could only be inherited. A unique way of capturing light, of translating emotions into strokes. A succession of memories hit him like a high-speed train. Helen showing her first works in college, her shy smile when he praised her technique, the long conversations about art and life at the corner cafe. And then the contest, the decision he made the last time he saw her. Richard picked up the phone again, his hands trembling slightly. "Beth, cancel all my appointments this week and prepare a folder with all the files we have on Helen Adams, all of them." He knew he was stirring up a hornet's nest, that some truths should remain buried, but now it was too late. Fate had brought Helen's daughter to him, and with her all the shadows of the past he had tried so hard to forget. Marina was focused, at her desk, finishing some more studies for the cosmetics campaign when Claire appeared, practically jumping with excitement. "You won't believe it," she exclaimed, lowering her voice afterward. "Richard Miller personally asked to see your work, all of it and more. He wants you to prepare a complete presentation for tomorrow." The digital brush Marina was holding almost fell from her hand. "What do you mean? But I'm just an intern." "Exactly. This has never happened before. He never takes interest in interns' work. In fact, he barely appears in the creative department since..." Claire stopped abruptly, as if she had said too much. "Since when?" "I don't know exactly," Claire evaded, but her face revealed there was more to that story. "It was before my time. Here, but look, you should be happy. It's a unique opportunity." Marina nodded, trying to ignore the butterflies in her stomach that the news had caused. There was something in Richard Miller's gaze that intrigued and frightened her at the same time, as if he knew something about her that she didn't even know herself. She spent the rest of the day organizing her work, selecting her best pieces. Among them, she hesitated before including the portrait of her mother. That illustration always provoked intense reactions in people, and something told her this time would be no different. At the end of the workday, when almost everyone had already left, Marina decided to do a final review of her material. The floor was quiet, illuminated only by the late afternoon light coming through the windows. That's when she noticed a half-open door at the end of the hallway, a room she had never seen before. Driven by a curiosity she couldn't contain, Marina approached silently. The sign on the door said, "Historical Archive." Through the gap, she could see old shelves filled with dusty folders and portfolios. She gently pushed the door, which opened with a soft creak. The smell of old paper and stored memories filled her lungs. The walls were covered with old posters, award-winning campaigns that had made history in American advertising. But it was a folder fallen on the floor that caught her attention. When she picked it up, her heart almost stopped. On the cover, in already faded letters, was written, "New Art Exhibition, 1998." And just below, a list of names, among them, highlighted in red, Helen Adams. "Mom," Marina whispered, her hands trembling as she opened the folder. Inside, she found old photos of an art exhibition. Her gaze wandered over the black and white images until stopping on one that made her blood freeze. There was her mother, much younger, smiling next to a man she immediately recognized. A decades younger Richard Miller, with brushes in hand, and a smile she had never seen on his current face. In the next photo they appeared again, but now there was a third person, an elegant woman Marina didn't know. The three seemed happy, carefree, as if the future was just a bright promise on the horizon. "What are you doing here?" The deep, authoritative voice made Marina jump. Richard Miller was standing at the door, his silhouette cut against the hallway light. His face was pale as if he had seen a ghost. "I'm sorry," Marina stammered, dropping the folder. The photos scattered on the floor like autumn leaves. "I was just—" "Leave," he ordered, his voice trembling slightly. "Now." Marina ran out of the room, her heart beating erratically. But before turning the corner, she could still see for the last time the expression on Richard's face. It wasn't anger she saw in his eyes. It was fear. A deep and old fear, as if the past had finally caught up with the present. Back at her desk, Marina gathered her things with shaking hands. Her mind was buzzing with questions. How did her mother know Richard Miller? Why had he never mentioned this? And who was that other woman in the photo? More importantly, why did she have the feeling that she had just stumbled upon a secret that should have remained buried in the past? Richard remained in the archive room for long minutes after Marina left, his eyes fixed on the photographs scattered on the floor. Each image was like a stab in his chest, bringing to the surface memories he had tried so hard to bury. With trembling fingers, he picked up the photo that tormented him most. Him, Helen, and Beth, his deceased fiancée, smiling in front of a blank canvas. That moment frozen in time when everything was still possible, when the future seemed as bright as the colors on his palette. "Mr. Miller?" The voice of his current assistant brought him back to the present. "Are you okay? You've been here for hours." Richard composed himself, quickly putting the photos back in the folder. "Cancel tomorrow's presentation," he ordered, his voice hoarse, "and prepare my transfer to the London office immediately." "But sir, the cosmetics project." "Pass it to Thompson. He can supervise the intern." Richard walked past her without looking back, leaving a trail of tension in the air. In his luxurious apartment at the top of one of Chicago's most exclusive buildings, Richard poured himself another drink while observing the nocturnal city through floor-to-ceiling windows. The apartment was decorated with an almost obsessive minimalism. There wasn't a single artwork on the walls, no photo, no color beyond shades of gray and black. Except for a locked door at the end of the hallway, a door he hadn't opened in 20 years. That night, however, something had changed. The encounter with Marina, the old photos, everything conspired to break the barriers he had so meticulously built over the years. With hesitant steps, Richard walked to the forbidden door. The key, which he always carried with him as a penance, weighed in his pocket. When he finally inserted it in the lock, his hands were trembling so much he could barely turn it. The smell of dry paint and dusty memories hit him like a wave. There was his old studio, preserved exactly as he had left it 2 decades ago. Canvases covered by white sheets, dried brushes in glass jars, a palette still with traces of the last colors he had mixed, and on the main wall, covered by a dark cloth, the painting. That painting. Richard approached slowly, as if in a trance. His fingers touched the fabric, hesitated, and then, in a sudden movement, pulled it. The revealed canvas made him stagger. It was a double portrait, Helen and Beth, painted in his characteristic style of that time, their figures merging in a dance of light and shadow. It had started as an engagement gift for Beth, a way to unite the two most important women in his life at that time. But it had become his last work, completed on the night when everything changed. Why did she have to come back, he murmured to the silence of the studio. Why her daughter? His eyes traveled over the details of the painting, lingering on Helen's eyes, the same eyes that now haunted him through Marina's face, eyes that held a secret, a truth that he had tried so hard to forget. The phone rang in his pocket, making him start. It was a message from his assistant. Flights to London confirmed. For tomorrow night. Should I inform the department? Richard looked once more at the painting, at the faces of the two women who had defined his life, and made a decision. Fleeing to London wouldn't erase the past. Not this time. Marina deserved to know the truth, even if that truth could destroy everything he had built. With trembling fingers, he typed his response. Cancel the flights and schedule a private meeting with Marina Adams for tomorrow, first thing. It was time to face the ghosts that had haunted him for so long, even if it meant losing everything again. Marina arrived at Art Corp earlier than usual that morning, her hands still trembling as she held the coffee cup she had bought at the corner bakery. The message she had received the night before hadn't allowed her to sleep. Meeting with Richard Miller, 7:30 a.m., President's office. The top floor of the building was different from anything she had seen in the company. The luxury was discreet but imposing. The walls, unlike the lower floors filled with art and posters, were devoid of any decoration. The silence was almost palpable. Richard's assistant, a middle-aged woman with a serious expression, led her to a meeting room with a panoramic view of the city. He'll be here soon, she informed, leaving Marina alone with her thoughts and the sunrise that was tinting Chicago's sky with orange hues. Marina took from her bag the item she had spent the entire night contemplating, an old photo of her mother, very similar to the one she had found in the archive. In it, Helen smiled at the camera, sitting in front of a blank canvas, brushes in her hands and eyes bright with possibilities. She always preferred to paint at dawn. Richard's voice startled her. He was standing at the door, looking more human and vulnerable than usual in his impeccable suit. His dark circles revealed that he also hadn't slept. "How do you know?" Marina asked, her voice barely a whisper. Richard walked slowly to the window, his eyes lost on the horizon. "Because I was there. Every morning for almost 2 years, I watched her paint as the sun rose." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with 2 decades of unspoken secrets. Marina felt her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Your mother," Richard continued, his voice breaking, "was my student at the art college. The most talented I ever had. She had something that can't be taught, a unique way of seeing the world, of translating emotions into colors." Marina observed his every movement, every expression that crossed his face as the memories emerged. "We became close. I mentored her, encouraged her. She made me rediscover my love for art that I had lost in academic bureaucracy." He paused, as if the next words were too difficult. "And then, I met Beth." "The woman in the photo," Marina murmured. "Yes, Beth was the owner of an important gallery. She saw Helen's work and, well, we fell in love. It was an intense time. Me, divided between my brightest student and the woman who had stolen my heart." Richard finally turned to face her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Your mother was the first to notice. She saw something in Beth that I, blinded by passion, couldn't see. She tried to warn me about certain inconsistencies in the gallery's business." Marina felt each word like a puzzle piece fitting in, forming an image she had never imagined existed. "There was an important contest," he continued, his voice now almost a whisper. "The prize was an international exhibition. Helen was entered. Her work was extraordinary, revolutionary even. But Beth—" He swallowed hard. "Beth had other plans." "What happened?" Marina asked, even fearing the answer. "Your mother discovered that Beth was manipulating the contest. It wasn't the first time. The gallery was involved in a money laundering scheme through overpriced artwork. Helen threatened to expose everything. Richard ran his hands over his face as if trying to erase the memories. I didn't believe her. I chose to stand by Beth. I used my influence to disqualify Helen's work in the contest. Tears now flowed freely down Marina's face. Why? Because I was a coward. Because I was in love. Because, he hesitated, looking directly into her eyes, because your mother was pregnant, Marina, with my child. The world around Marina seemed to have stopped spinning. Richard's words echoed in her mind like a deafening bell. Her legs weakened, and she had to hold onto the table to avoid falling. No, she stammered. It can't be. Helen told me on the night of the contest results, Richard continued, his voice laden with regret. She came to my studio, devastated not by the defeat, but by my betrayal. That's when she revealed the pregnancy. Marina closed her eyes, memories of her childhood passing like a film in her mind. Her mother, always avoiding talking about her father, changing the subject when she asked, keeping a silent sadness in her eyes when observing her first drawings. Why did she never tell me? Her voice came out broken. Because I asked her not to. Richard approached the table, leaning heavily on a chair. That night after she left the studio, Beth appeared. She had followed us. The argument was intense. He paused, as if the next words were physically painful to pronounce. Beth threatened to destroy not only Helen's career, but also her future. She had connections, influence. I made a deal with her. What kind of deal? Marina asked, although part of her didn't want to know the answer. I would abandon art. I would dedicate myself exclusively to the gallery's business, transforming it into the largest advertising agency in the country. In exchange, she would leave Helen alone. And he swallowed hard. I would never try to contact you both again. Marina rose abruptly, walking to the window. The city below continued its frantic rhythm, oblivious to the emotional earthquake happening in that room. My mother, she began, her voice trembling. She never painted again after that. She dedicated herself to teaching art in public schools. She always said that true art was in inspiring others to create. Richard closed his eyes, as if each word was a stab. Helen was always better than all of us. She transformed her pain into something positive. I just hid behind walls of glass and concrete. And Beth? Marina asked, still with her back to him. She departed a few years later, a car accident on the expressway. His voice was distant, as if speaking of an old dream. Guilt consumed her. In her last days, she confessed everything. The scheme in the gallery, the manipulations, how she had planned every detail to maintain her empire. The silence that followed was deafening. Marina finally turned, facing the man she had just discovered was her father. For the first time, she could clearly see the similarities, not just physical, but in the way both carried their art like a cross, a blessing and a curse. Why are you telling me all this now? She asked. Because when I saw your drawings, when I recognized Helen's talent in each of your strokes, I realized that I couldn't leave the past buried. You deserved to know the truth. He hesitated, then continued. And because I'm tired of living surrounded by empty walls, pretending that art doesn't run in my veins, in our veins. Marina walked slowly to her bag, taking out her portfolio. With trembling hands, she opened to the page with her mother's portrait, the same one that had caught Richard's attention that day in the bathroom. She never stopped loving art, Marina said softly. And she never stopped talking about you, not by your name, but through the stories she told about an artist who had lost his way, but who would one day find it again. Richard approached the portrait, his fingers hovering over the paper, as if fearing that his touch might make the image disappear. She always had too much faith in me. Maybe, Marina responded, it's time to have faith in ourselves. The days following the revelation were a whirlwind of emotions for Marina. She continued, going to work, fulfilling her duties as an intern, But each corridor of ArtCorp now seemed to tell a different story. Each look from Richard, even from a distance, carried the weight of 2 decades of secrets. "You're different," Julia commented one night while they shared an improvised dinner in their small apartment. "Did something happen at the agency?" Marina contemplated her instant noodles, thinking about how to explain something that she herself was still processing. "Remember when you said I should find out more about my father?" Julia dropped her fork, her eyes wide. "Don't tell me that." "Richard Miller," Marina said, the words still sounding strange in her mouth. "The owner of ArtCorp is my father." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant noise of traffic outside. Julia opened and closed her mouth several times before being able to speak. "Marina, that's unbelievable. How did you find out?" Marina told her everything. The photos in the archive, the conversation in the meeting room, the story of her mother with Richard and Beth. As she spoke, she realized that silent tears were streaming down her face. "The strangest thing," she concluded, wiping her eyes, "is that now I understand so many things. Why my mom always had that distant look when I showed her my drawings. Why she insisted so much that I should never give up on art, even when everything seemed impossible." The next day, when she arrived at the agency, Marina found an envelope on her desk. Inside was a key and a note with Richard's elegant handwriting. "18th floor, room 1802, if you want." The 18th floor was an area of the agency she didn't know. When she opened the door to room 1802, her heart almost stopped. It was a complete art studio with easels, blank canvases, all types of paints and materials she had only dreamed of using. "It was my old studio," Richard's voice sounded behind her. "It's been closed for 20 years. Marina turned, observing. The man she now knew was her father. He seemed different, lighter perhaps, as if sharing the truth had removed an invisible weight from his shoulders. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. "Because it's rightfully yours," he responded, entering the room, "and because—" He hesitated, then continued, "because I thought we could use this space, together." Marina felt her heart accelerate. "For what?" "To create," Richard said simply. "You have your mother's talent, Marina, and I need to rediscover the artist I buried so long ago." He walked to an area covered by a cloth at the back of the studio. When he removed it, he revealed an unfinished canvas, the double portrait of Helen and Beth that he had never completed. "This was my last work," he explained, his voice breaking. "I never managed to finish it, but now—" He turned to Marina, his eyes shining with something that looked like hope. "Now I think perhaps we can create something new, something that honors the past, but looks to the future." Marina approached the canvas, her fingers lightly tracing the contours of her mother's face. The painting, even unfinished, perfectly captured Helen's essence, her gentle strength, her unwavering kindness. "She used to say," Marina spoke softly, "that true art doesn't come from perfect technique, but from the courage to be vulnerable." Richard smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed his face. "Your mother was always the wisest of us." So, Marina picked up a brush, twirling it between her fingers as her mother used to do. "Where do we begin?" "At the beginning," Richard responded, picking up another brush. "Always at the beginning." And so father and daughter, separated by 2 decades of secrets and silences, began to paint together, letting art do what words couldn't always achieve: heal, connect, rebuild. The following weeks brought a subtle but profound transformation to ArtCorp. The older employees began to notice changes in Richard's behavior. The man previously known for his coldness and distance could now be seen regularly in the creative department, his sleeves rolled up and stained with paint, discussing artistic concepts with the team. The studio on the 18th floor became a sanctuary for father and daughter. Every morning before the official workday began, they met there to paint. At first the silence was awkward, laden with unsaid words and lost years, but gradually, brushstroke after brushstroke, the barriers began to dissolve. "Your mother had this same way of mixing colors," Richard commented one morning watching Marina work on a canvas. "As if she were creating a new language with them. Marina smiled without taking her eyes off her work. She always said that each color has its own story to tell. The secret is knowing how to listen. On another occasion, while cleaning the brushes after a particularly productive session, Richard finally found the courage to ask the question that tormented him. "How were her last days?" he asked softly. "Your mother, did she suffer?" Marina stopped what she was doing, breathing deeply before responding. She was at peace. She continued teaching until the end, always with a smile on her face. In the last week, she asked to set up a small studio in the backyard of our house. She spent days painting a final picture. And what happened to it? It's kept at home. She asked me to only open it when I found my own path in art. Marina paused, then added, "I think now is the time." The next day, Marina brought the wrapped painting to the studio. Richard was there waiting, his face a mask of expectation and apprehension. Together, they removed the paper that protected Helen's last work. The painting left them speechless. It was a self-portrait, but not of the conventional type. Helen had painted herself from behind in front of a blank canvas. At her side, two figures also from behind, a smaller one, clearly Marina, and another that could only be Richard. The three figures were connected by threads of colored light, as if their creative energies were intertwined across time and space. In the lower corner of the painting, a message written in Helen's delicate handwriting. "Art is a circle that never closes. Keep painting our story." Richard had to sit down, his legs trembling. "She knew," he murmured. "She always knew that one day we would find each other." "She never lost faith," Marina responded, her voice breaking. "Not in you, nor in art." That revelation marked a new chapter in their relationship. Helen's painting was hung in the studio, serving as a constant reminder of the transformative power of art and love. The changes began to reflect in the agency's work as well. Richard, inspired by the renewed connection with his artistic essence, implemented a mentoring program for young artists from the outskirts. The creative department gained a new energy, a fusion between corporate experience and the artistic authenticity that Helen had always advocated for. On a particularly significant morning, Richard arrived at the studio carrying an old folder. "I found this last night," he said, extending it to Marina. Inside were dozens of sketches and studies made by Helen during her time in college, all carefully preserved. "She had a project," he explained, his voice soft with remembrance. "She wanted to create a space where art and advertising could coexist without compromising each other's integrity. At the time, I thought it was a naive dream." Marina reverently leafed through the papers, recognizing in her mother's strokes the seeds of what she herself was trying to express in her work. "Maybe," she suggested, "it's not too late to realize that dream." Richard looked at his daughter, seeing in her not just Helen's reflection, but also a bridge to the future he had abandoned so long ago. "No," he agreed, "it's not too late." The news spread quickly through the corridors of ArtCorp. The creative department was about to undergo a revolution. Richard Miller had called a general meeting, something that hadn't happened in years. The buzz among employees was intense, especially when they saw Marina helping to organize the main auditorium. "They say he smiled yesterday," Claire whispered to a group of colleagues. Really smiled, not that protocol smile for client meetings. On the morning of the meeting, the auditorium was packed. Employees from all departments squeezed into the chairs, some even standing along the sides. The air was charged with expectation. Richard took the stage, seeming simultaneously the same powerful executive as always, and someone completely different. His sleeves were slightly stained with paint, and there was a different energy in his movements. "For 20 years, he began, his voice echoing through the silent environment, "ArtCorp has been built on a lie. The lie that art and business are incompatible worlds, that we need to choose between creating and prospering." A murmur ran through the audience. Richard continued, "Today that changes. We are launching a new program in the agency, the Helen Project." In the front row, Marina felt her heart accelerate. She knew about the project. She had helped develop it over the past few weeks. But hearing her mother's name being pronounced publicly by her father had a special weight. The Helen Project will be an incubator for artistic talents, Richard explained, his voice gaining strength. We will seek young artists in the outskirts, in public schools, in places where talent is often suffocated by the lack of opportunities. They will receive mentoring, equipment, space to create, and most importantly, they will have total artistic freedom. The screens in the auditorium lit up, showing images of the old studio on the 18th floor, now transformed into a vibrant, collaborative space. The walls, previously empty, were covered with art, including Helen's final painting. Each department of Art Corp will be invited to participate, Richard continued. We want to create a real bridge between the corporate world and the artistic one, no longer as separate worlds, but as different faces of the same coin. Marina observed the audience's reaction. She saw surprised faces, some skeptical, but many, especially the younger ones, with eyes shining with possibilities. To lead this project, Richard made a significant pause. I invited someone who taught me that it's never too late to reconnect with our artistic essence, someone who carries in her veins the true spirit of this project. He extended his hand toward the front row. Marina, would you join me up here? Marina's heart seemed about to leap from her chest as she climbed the steps to the stage. The whispers in the audience increased. Everyone knew the young intern who had arrived a few months ago, but no one expected to see her there. Marina Adams, Richard announced, his voice laden with contained emotion, is more than the coordinator of the Helen Project. She is my daughter. The silence that followed was deafening. Marina saw Claire in the audience, mouth agape, mentally connecting all the dots from the past few weeks. And she, Richard continued, just like her mother, Helen Adams, reminded me that true art isn't born from technical perfection or commercial success. It's born from the courage to be authentic, to mix colors that no one thought to mix before. Marina took the microphone, her hands trembling slightly. The Helen Project isn't just an incentive program, she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. It's a declaration that it's possible to create without compromising our essence. My mother believed that art has the power to transform realities. Today we are taking the first step to prove that she was right. The presentation continued with practical details of the project, but something fundamental had changed in that room. The invisible walls that separated the directors from the employees, the commercial from the creative, began to dissolve. At the end of the meeting, as people dispersed, commenting animatedly, Claire approached Marina with tears in her eyes. Now I understand, she said, hugging her friend. I understand why you managed to change everything here in such a short time. You weren't just working, you were healing old wounds. Marina returned the hug, observing over Claire's shoulder, her father animatedly conversing with a group of designers. For the first time since she had met him, he seemed truly alive. The weeks that followed the announcement of the Helen Project were a whirlwind of activities. The 18th floor of Art Corp transformed into a creative anthill, with walls being torn down, literally and metaphorically, to make room for the new space. Marina divided her time between coordinating the renovations, selecting the first participants for the project, and continuing her morning painting sessions with Richard. These quiet mornings in the studio had become a sacred ritual for both, a moment of connection that went beyond words. You know what I miss most about her, Marina commented during one of these mornings, as they worked side by side on their canvases. The smell of coffee with cinnamon that always filled the house when she started painting. She said every artist needs their own ritual. Richard smiled, a gesture that now came more naturally. She taught me that. Before her, I was all technique, precision. Helen showed me that art needs soul, its own rituals. That afternoon, during a selection meeting for the project's first scholarship recipients, one particular candidate caught everyone's attention. Anna Lewis, 16 years old, resident of a community in the East Side, had sent a digital portfolio created entirely on her phone. I don't have a computer at home, she explained during the video interview, so I learned to draw on my phone. Sometimes I stay late at school just to use the Wi-Fi and research new techniques. Marina exchanged a significant look with Richard. Both recognized in that young woman the same hunger to create that drove them. "You would be our first teenage scholarship recipient," Marina explained. "We would have to adapt some processes, get permission from your parents." "My mom works in 2 family homes," Anna interrupted, her eyes shining with determination. "She leaves the house at 5 in the morning every day so I can study and draw. If you give me this chance, I promise I won't waste it." Richard, who had remained silent until then, leaned forward. "Anna, do you have a ritual when you draw?" The question caught the girl by surprise. I like to listen to the sound of rain," she answered after a moment. "When it's not raining, I use an app on my phone that mimics the sound. It helps me concentrate." Marina felt tears forming in her eyes. Richard smiled, that rare smile that now appeared more and more frequently. "Welcome to the Helen Project," he said simply. The following week, when she arrived for her morning painting session, Marina found a surprise in the studio. Richard had installed a small coffee machine in the corner, and the aroma of cinnamon filled the air. "I thought we could create our own rituals," he explained, a bit awkwardly. "Honoring the old ones and creating new ones." Marina hugged her father, staining his impeccable suit with paint, something that weeks ago would have been unthinkable, but now only made them laugh. Later that day, watching Anna explore her new workspace in wonder, with a professional graphics tablet and a state-of-the-art computer, Marina thought of her mother. In the painting she had left, the 3 figures with their backs to the blank canvas seemed to smile, as if they knew this moment would come. "Do you think she would be proud?" Marina asked Richard, who was observing the scene by her side. "She always was," he responded softly. "Even when we didn't know it, even when we were lost, Helen never stopped believing that we would find our way back to art, back to each other." Fantasy. The other side of the studio, Anna had connected her phone to a speaker. The soft sound of rain filled the environment, mixing with the aroma of coffee with cinnamon. A new ritual was beginning, while the old ones echoed through time, colors mixing on a canvas that was never finished being painted. The Helen Project was completing its first month, and the transformation at ArtCorp was visible on every floor. The once monochromatic walls now displayed works by the scholarship recipients, bringing color and life to the corporate corridors. But the biggest change could be seen on the 18th floor, where a special exhibition was being prepared. "Are you sure about this, Dad?" Marina asked, adjusting the lighting over one of the canvases. It was the first time she called him that in public, and the word still sounded new on her tongue. Richard nodded, his eyes fixed on the painting they had created together in the past weeks, a reinterpretation of Helen's last work. "It's time to open the doors, all of them." The Bridges exhibition would be the first official show of the Helen Project, bringing together works from the scholarship recipients alongside works from ArtCorp's own employees. At the center of the exhibition, 3 main works would tell a story of redemption and reconnection. Helen's last painting, the unfinished portrait that Richard had painted of Helen and Beth, and the new work that father and daughter had created together. "Anna is nervous about her presentation," Marina commented, observing the young scholarship recipient rehearsing her speech in a corner of the studio. "She's never spoken in public before. Just like her mother," Claire commented, approaching with a clipboard. "I talked to her this morning when she came to sign the authorizations. She said she also trembled all over when she had to talk to her employers." Richard observed the young artist for a moment, then walked over to her. Marina and Claire watched in surprise as he sat next to Anna and began to talk softly. Gradually, the girl's tense shoulders relaxed. "What do you think he's telling her?" Claire whispered. Marina smiled, recognizing in her father the same gentleness that her mother showed with her more insecure students. Knowing him, he must be telling her about his first exhibition. The night of the exhibition arrived with an electric energy in the air. The 18th floor was unrecognizable. The studio walls had been removed, creating a spacious and welcoming environment. Soft lights highlighted each work, and the aroma of coffee with cinnamon filled the air, a trademark that Marina had insisted on maintaining. The guests began to arrive: ArtCorp employees, family members of the scholarship recipients, journalists, important figures from the art and advertising world. Marina observed everything from a corner, her heart overflowing, seeing so many different worlds naturally mixing. "She would be proud," a familiar voice sounded behind her. Marina turned to find Julia, who had just arrived. "Your mother, I mean. This is exactly what she always dreamed of." Marina hugged her friend, grateful for her presence. "Sometimes, it seems like she planned all this, you know? As if she knew that one day it would happen." "Maybe she did know," Julia responded, observing Richard, who was animatedly conversing with Anna's mother. Mothers have that gift of seeing beyond the present. The most emotional moment of the night came when Anna took the small, improvised stage to present her work, a series of digital illustrations that blended elements of her community with classical painting techniques. "Before the Helen project," she began, her voice initially trembling but gaining strength, "I thought art was something distant from my reality, something that belonged to museums and galleries, not to my street, my life." Richard, standing next to Marina, gently squeezed his daughter's hand. "But here," Anna continued, "I learned that art is everywhere, in the colors of the sunset seen from the rooftop, in the graffiti on the walls, in the stories my mother tells when she returns from work. And I also learned that I don't need to choose between who I am and who I can become." Marina felt tears streaming down her face, seeing in Anna's bright eyes the same dream that her mother had planted so many years ago, the dream of an art without barriers that could flourish anywhere. The young artist ended her presentation with a revelation that moved everyone. "Each of my works has a rain sound hidden somewhere. It's my way of remembering where I came from, even as I fly to where I want to go." At that moment, as if by magic, a gentle rain began to fall outside, its drops creating a soft melody against the building's windows. Marina looked at the painting she had created with her father. In it, 3 generations of artists no longer stood with their backs to the blank canvas, but faced a horizon full of possibilities. The success of the Bridges exhibition exceeded all expectations. In the days that followed, ArtCorp was flooded with messages and calls, other companies wanting to know about the project, young artists asking about the next selections, media outlets interested in telling that unique story. But for Marina and Richard, the greatest victory wasn't in the external repercussion, but in the small transformations they observed daily. Like the morning they found a group of executives from the finance department participating in a watercolor class before work hours, or when they saw the receptionist who had been so cold to Marina on her first day, now proudly displaying her own drawings. "I think we need more space," Marina commented during one of their morning painting sessions with Richard. "The waiting list for the project already has more than 200 names." Richard nodded, without taking his eyes off the canvas he was working on, a new portrait, this time of Marina. "I've thought about that. The building next door is for sale." Marina almost dropped her brush. "The entire building." "Why not?" He smiled, that smile that now appeared more and more frequently. "We could transform it into a cultural center. Classrooms, studios, a permanent gallery. A place where art and business can truly coexist. Like what Mum always dreamed of," Marina murmured, feeling her heart tighten with a mixture of longing and gratitude. "Exactly," Richard responded, his voice soft. "Actually, I found something interesting in her old archives. Want to see?" He walked to his folder, taking out a worn notebook. It was her project diary from college. "Look at this." Marina took the notebook with trembling hands. In the yellowed pages, she found detailed sketches of a cultural center, very similar to what they were planning. In the margin notes, she recognized her mother's delicate handwriting, "Art without borders, where everyone can create." She had everything planned, Marina said, running her fingers over the drawings. Every detail. "Helen always saw beyond her time," Richard commented, sitting next to his daughter. She knew that one day art would find its way back to corporate spaces, not as decoration, but as a transformative force. That afternoon, during a mentoring session with the scholarship recipients, Anna presented her new project, a series of digital art workshops for children from her community using ArtCorp's computers on weekends. "I learned that it's not enough to just rise in life," she explained, with a maturity that went beyond her 16 years. We need to build elevators, for others to rise too. Marina watched proudly as the young artist showed her plans, using technical terms that a few months ago she didn't even know. Beside her, Richard was taking notes, completely absorbed. He had changed so much in the past few weeks. The impeccable suit was still there, but now frequently stained with paint, like a flag of surrender to the transformative power of art. "You know what I miss most about her," Richard commented softly, while Anna continued her presentation. "The way she could see beauty in everything, even in mistakes, in accidental stains, she found possibilities." Marina smiled, remembering the long afternoons of her childhood when her mother transformed her crooked drawings into fantastic adventures. She always said there are no mistakes in art, only new paths to explore. "That's why the next step of the project needs to be special," Richard said, his eyes shining with that light that Marina now recognized as artistic inspiration. Not just a new building, but a living manifesto, a place where each person who enters can feel capable of creating, regardless of their origin or training. "What will we call it?" Marina asked, although she already knew the answer in her heart. Richard smiled, taking a small folded paper from his pocket. It was an old business card yellowed by time. On it, in Helen's handwriting, was written, "Colors That Heal Institute." Where art transforms realities. She really thought of everything, Marina whispered, feeling tears forming in her eyes. "Yes," Richard responded, his voice breaking. Now it's our turn to bring her dream to life. One Saturday morning found Marina and Richard in an unexpected place. The old house where she had grown up with Helen. The small construction in the outskirts remained practically intact, preserved by Julia, who continued living there as a tenant after Marina's departure. "Are you sure you want to do this today?" Julia gently asked, watching Marina hesitate before the door of her mother's old studio in the backyard. Marina nodded, instinctively squeezing Richard's hand. "It's time. If we're really going to build the Colors That Heal Institute, we need to start at the beginning." The studio was a simple room, built with construction material leftovers and a lot of love. The walls, still stained with paint, told stories of infinite painting sessions. The smell of coffee with cinnamon seemed to have impregnated the wood itself. "This is where she gave lessons to the neighborhood children," Marina explained as she opened the windows, letting the morning light in. "On weekends, this place was full of life." Richard walked slowly through the space, his eyes absorbing every detail. He stopped in front of a wall covered with children's drawings, preserved by a layer of varnish. She kept all of them. "Every one," Marina smiled, touching a particular drawing, a smiling sun with giraffe legs. "This was my first. Mum said it was proof that art doesn't need to make sense to touch the heart." In a corner, they found carefully stacked boxes, all labeled with Helen's handwriting. Future projects, dreams under construction, seeds to plant. Richard and Marina began to open them one by one, discovering treasures that Helen had kept over the years. "Look at this," Marina exclaimed, removing a folder from the Seeds to Plant box. It was a detailed project for a network of community studios, each adapted to the specific needs of different communities. "She thought of everything," Richard murmured, leafing through the pages, "even the practical aspects of financial sustainability. Mom always said that dreams need strong roots to be able to give wings to others." They continued exploring the boxes, finding more and more projects, ideas, and dreams that Helen had carefully documented. There were plans for art therapy workshops, teacher training programs, exchange projects between artists from different communities. "This is it," Marina suddenly exclaimed, her eyes shining with inspiration. "We can't just build a new modern institute. We need to start here at the roots." Richard looked at her curiously. "What do you have in mind? What if we transform this studio into the first nucleus of the institute? Keeping it exactly as it is, just updating what's necessary. We could use Mom's methodology, start with the neighborhood children exactly as she did, and then expand." "Organically," Richard completed, understanding the vision. "Each new nucleus maintaining the essence but adapted to its community." "Exactly. The new building would be the administrative headquarters and the training center. But the heart of the project would be here, in the communities. Julia, who had remained silent observing father and daughter, wiped away a tear. Helen always said that true art is born from the ground we walk on. Richard walked to the window, observing the simple backyard where so many dreams had been planted. On the clothesline, white sheets danced in the breeze, like blank canvases waiting to be filled. "You know what this means?" he asked, turning to Marina with a smile. "We have a lot of work ahead of us." "Starting with this space," Marina responded, already rolling up her sleeves. "I think it's time to give these walls a new color." They spent the rest of the day working together, cleaning, organizing, planning. Richard, the powerful businessman, didn't hesitate to climb ladders to clean cobwebs or kneel down to fix loose boards. At dusk, sitting in the backyard with cups of coffee with cinnamon, they observed with satisfaction the result of their work. The studio was clean and organized, but maintained its intact soul. On the main wall next to the preserved children's drawings, they had hung Helen's last painting. "Tomorrow I'll bring Anna and some other scholarship recipients to see the space," Marina commented. "I think it's time for them to see where it all began." Richard nodded, his eyes fixed on Helen's painting. "Do you think she knew that one day we would be here, together, continuing her work?" "I'm certain she did," Marina smiled, resting her head on her father's shoulder. "Mum always said that true art is like water. It always finds its way no matter how many obstacles it encounters." The news that Helen's old studio would be reopened spread through the neighborhood like paint in water. In a few days, the small space in the backyard became a meeting point for generations. Helen's former students brought their children, neighbors appeared with old stories and photographs. Young artists from the Helen Project came to learn about the roots of their inspiration. Anna, in particular, was enchanted by the simplicity and strength of the place. "It's different from ArtCorp," she commented while helping to organize materials on the newly installed shelves. "There everything is new and shiny. Here it seems like each paint stain has a story to tell." Marina smiled, recognizing in the young woman's words the same enchantment she had felt in her childhood. "Mom used to say that a studio without stains is like a book without words." The first official workshop in the renovated studio happened on a sunny Saturday. Marina had invited all the scholarship recipients of the Helen Project for a special morning of free creation with the neighborhood children. Richard, to everyone's surprise, arrived early, wearing jeans and a t-shirt for the first time in decades. "What?" he asked before the astonished looks. "I can't teach painting in a suit." The morning unfolded like a symphony of colors and laughter. The scholarship recipients, many coming from realities similar to those children, connected instantly with them. Anna organized a digital drawing workshop using tablets, while other recipients taught traditional techniques. Richard, initially shy, soon found himself surrounded by a group of children fascinated with his technique of mixing colors. "It's like magic," exclaimed a boy when Richard demonstrated how to create different shades of green. "It's not magic," Richard smiled, remembering Helen's words. "It's just knowing how to listen to what the colors have to say." During the lunch break, bread, with butter and coffee with cinnamon, as Helen always served, Marina observed the scene with her heart overflowing. Her father, the once distant Richard Miller, sitting on the floor with children, his hands stained with paint, teaching with the same patience and love that Helen had shown. "Your mother would be so happy," commented Mrs. Thompson, an old neighbor who had known Helen. Seeing this place alive again, full of children, and it was all she wanted. In the afternoon, as the children presented their creations to their parents, Richard gathered the scholarship recipients for a special announcement. "Each of you," he began, his voice laden with emotion, "represents what Helen always dreamed of. Art that is born from real life, that transforms realities. So, I want to propose something, that each of you choose a community, a place that needs colors and hope. The Institute will support the creation of new centers, starting small like this one here." The eyes of the young artists shone with possibilities. Anna was the first to speak up. "Can I start one in my community? There's an abandoned warehouse. That would be perfect." Other scholarship recipients began to share their ideas, places they knew, communities that could benefit. Marina observed everything with tears in her eyes, seeing her mother's dream multiply like seeds in the wind. At the end of the day, when everyone had already left, Marina and Richard remained in the studio, organizing the materials and contemplating the new works that now decorated the walls alongside the drawings preserved by Helen. "You know what I realized today?" Richard commented, while cleaning the brushes. "Helen never really left. She's alive in every person who came in here today, in every stroke, every smile." Marina nodded, touching an old stain on the wall, a mark of a small hand that she had made at 5 years old. She always said that true art is immortal, not because it lasts forever, but because it continues living through the people it touches. "And now," Richard smiled, embracing his daughter, "we're going to make that light shine even brighter." In Helen's painting on the wall, the three figures seemed to smile, as if they knew that their dream was just beginning to bloom. 6 months had passed since the reopening of Helen's studio. What had begun as a humble tribute had transformed into a movement that spread throughout the city. 5 new centers of the Colors That Heal Institute were already functioning in different communities, each with its own identity, but all connected by the same spirit. On a particularly significant morning, Marina arrived early at the original studio for a surprise. On the exterior walls, Anna and other scholarship recipients had painted an impressive mural during the night. In it, Helen's face smiled serenely, emerging from a sea of brushes and colors that transformed into birds flying toward the horizon. "We wanted to create a tribute," Anna explained, still with paint stains on her hands and dark circles from working all night. "Each bird represents one of the Institute's centers." Marina hugged the young artist, unable to contain her tears. The portrait of her mother was perfect, not only in physical resemblance, but primarily in capturing her essence, that dreamy and determined look that so characterized her. When Richard arrived minutes later, he stopped in front of the mural, for long moments in silence. "This is exactly how I remember her," he finally said, his voice breaking, always looking beyond the horizon, seeing possibilities where others saw limits. That day would be special, the first meeting of all the Institute centers, a celebration of what they had achieved and planning for the future. Gradually, the studio filled with people, coordinators from different centers, scholarship recipients, students, each bringing stories and experiences to share. In the East Side Center, one of the coordinators recounted, "We have a 70-year-old gentleman who had never picked up a brush. Now he teaches watercolor classes to the neighborhood children. In our community," shared another, "the students' mothers started a fabric art project. They're already selling pieces at craft fairs." Anna, who coordinated the center in her own community, presented a project that moved everyone. "We're creating an app that connects all the centers. This way, a student from the South Side can take online classes with a teacher from the North Side, and artists from different communities can exchange experiences." Richard, who listened to everything attentively, stood up to make an announcement. "The building next to ArtCorp will be inaugurated next month as the official headquarters of the Institute. But after seeing all this, I realized that we need something more." He paused, looking at each face present before continuing. "We're going to create a scholarship fund in Helen's name. Each student who demonstrates talent and dedication will have the opportunity to attend art or design college, with all expenses paid." A murmur of excitement ran through the room. Marina, who didn't know about these plans, looked at her father with surprise and gratitude. "But there's more," he continued. "Each scholarship recipient will have only one obligation: to create or adopt a new center of the Institute in their community. Thus the cycle continues expanding." "Like the birds in the mural," Anna whispered, her eyes shining. "Exactly," Richard smiled. "Helen always said that true art is like a bird. It needs strong roots to create wings." At that moment, as if the universe wanted to give its own sign of approval, a ray of sunlight entered through the studio window, illuminating Helen's painting on the wall. The three figures, previously with their backs to the blank canvas, now seemed to look directly at all present, like silent guardians of that dream in constant expansion. Marina picked up a brush and walked to a blank canvas on the easel. "How about starting our meeting as Mom always did, creating something together?" One by one, they all stood up. Richard was the first to pick up a brush and join his daughter. Anna connected her tablet to the digital screen they had installed in the studio. Others picked up pencils, chalk, charcoal, each with their preferred instrument. And so, on that sunny morning, in the small studio where it all began, different generations, stories, and techniques united in a single collective work. In the center of the canvas, without anyone having planned it, a tree began to emerge, whose branches transformed into colorful birds, each flying in a different direction, but all connected by the same root. The inauguration of the official headquarters of the Colors That Heal Institute was scheduled to coincide with Helen's birthday. The date hadn't been chosen by chance. It was the way Marina and Richard found to celebrate not just the memory, but primarily the living legacy she had left. The new building was a work of art in itself. The facade, previously mirrored and impersonal like so many other corporate buildings, had been transformed into a giant canvas where artists from all the Institute's centers had left their mark. The result was a vibrant mosaic of styles and stories, a visual declaration that art knows no boundaries. On the morning of the inauguration, Marina arrived early to supervise the final preparations. She found Richard already there, standing before a special wall in the entrance hall, the Wall of Dreams as they had decided to call it. There, amid a permanent exhibition, was Helen's last painting, flanked by the portrait Richard had never finished and the work that father and daughter had created together. "It seems like it was yesterday," Richard commented when Marina approached. "You arriving late for the interview, me trying to escape who I really was." Marina smiled, adjusting the explanatory plaque under her mother's painting. "And now look, we're about to inaugurate something she always dreamed of." "Not just inaugurate," a cheerful voice interrupted. It was Anna carrying her inseparable tablet. "We're about to revolutionize the way art is taught and shared in Chicago." The young artist had become a fundamental piece in the Institute. Her app connecting the centers was about to be officially launched, and she had been chosen to give the opening speech representing the scholarship recipients. Throughout the morning, the building filled with life. Artists, students, teachers, and supporters arrived bringing even more color to the environment. Each floor had a different proposal. Studios equipped with cutting-edge technology alternated with more traditional spaces. Classrooms transformed into galleries, and common areas were designed to stimulate the exchange of experiences. On the terrace, a special surprise awaited the guests. Marina and Richard had recreated a replica of Helen's old studio there, complete with the aroma of coffee with cinnamon and a small garden, because, as Helen always said, art needs earth on its feet to be able to touch the sky. When the time came for the official ceremony, the main auditorium was packed. Anna took the stage with the confidence of someone who had found her place in the world. "A year ago," she began, her voice initially trembling but gaining strength, "I was drawing secretly during classes, dreaming of a future that seemed impossible. Today I'm here representing hundreds of young artists who, like me, discovered that dreams don't have a zip code." Richard and Marina watched proudly from the back of the stage. In a few months, Anna had become the living example of what the Institute represented, the bridge between talent and opportunity, between dream and reality. "But the Colors That Heal Institute isn't just about art," she continued. "It's about transformation. Each brushstroke, each pixel, each mark on paper is a declaration that we can be more than the world expects of us. Art doesn't just heal, it liberates." When it was Richard's turn to speak, he surprised everyone by dispensing with the microphone and walking to the center of the stage with a brush in his hand. "Words," he said, his voice naturally carrying through the auditorium, "are not always enough to express transformation, so if you'll allow me." He turned to a blank canvas that had been installed on the stage and began to paint. Marina immediately recognized the style. It was the technique that Helen had so admired in him, which he had abandoned for so long. As he painted, Richard continued speaking. Helen Adams wasn't just an extraordinary artist. She was a visionary who believed that art is a right, not a privilege. This institute isn't a tribute to her. It's the continuation of her most important work, the unwavering belief in the transformative power of art. The painting quickly took shape under his experienced hands, a sunset viewed from the outskirts, with antennas and high-tension wires transforming into giant brushes painting the sky. Each person in this auditorium, he concluded, giving the final brushstrokes, carries a bit of Helen with them. Whether in the drawings they make, the classes they teach, or simply in the courage to believe that art can change the world. This institute isn't a period, it's just the beginning of a new story that we will continue writing together. Marina joined her father on the stage, carrying an old box that everyone recognized. It was one of Helen's Seeds to Plant boxes from her studio. Inside it were hundreds of new brushes, each with a small tag. Art is a seed we plant today to harvest tomorrow. Keep painting your story. Helen. The first year of the Colors That Heal Institute was coming to an end, and with it a transformation that went far beyond the painted walls and touched lives. ArtCorp, previously known only for its commercial excellence, was now a reference in social and cultural responsibility. The 10 centers spread throughout the city pulsed with life and creativity, each with its own identity, but all connected by the same purpose. On a quiet afternoon, Marina found her father in Helen's old studio, where everything had begun. Richard was sitting on the worn wooden stool, contemplating a blank canvas. "Is everything okay?" she asked, noticing something different in his expression. "I found this morning," he responded, extending a yellowed envelope. "It was kept inside that painting techniques book that your mother loved so much." Marina took the envelope with trembling hands. She immediately recognized her mother's handwriting, to be opened when the colors shine again. Inside was a letter, written in the last week of Helen's life. "My beloved ones, if you are reading this letter, it means that you have finally found each other, and more importantly, you have found your way back to art. Richard, my first love, teacher and friend, I always knew that one day you would free yourself from the glass walls you built around you. Art never left your heart. It just patiently waited for the right moment to bloom again. Marina, my little artist, from your first crooked drawings, I saw in you not just my talent, but primarily Richard's strength. That silent determination, that ability to transform pain into beauty. You are so alike, two artist souls trying to pretend you're not. The institute you've created is more than I ever dreamed. Each child who learns to express themselves through art, each young person who discovers their creative potential, each adult who rediscovers the joy of creating. They are all part of something bigger that began long ago, when a young art professor fell in love with a dreamy student. Don't feel guilt about the past. Everything happened exactly as it should have happened. The pain that separated us was the same force that, years later, united you again. Art has its own paths of healing. Now, I have one last request. In the drawer of the old desk, behind the Bohr paint shelf, there is a blank canvas that I kept especially for this moment. I want you to paint it together. Don't plan, don't overthink. Just let your hearts guide the brushes. And always remember, art isn't about creating something perfect. It's about being true to who we are. With eternal love, Helen. Marina and Richard remained in silence for long moments after reading, tears flowing freely down their faces. Finally, Marina stood up and went to the desk. Exactly where the letter indicated, she found a blank canvas, perfectly preserved. "I think it's time," she said softly, placing the canvas on the easel. Richard nodded, picking up 2 brushes. "Without planning?" "Without planning," Marina confirmed, smiling through the tears. "Just letting the heart guide." And so father and daughter, separated by 2 decades of secrets and silences, began to paint together. Their brushes danced over the canvas as if they had a life of their own, creating shapes and colors that seemed to emerge directly from their souls. There were no words, just the soft sound of the brushes, the familiar aroma of coffee with cinnamon and the almost palpable presence of Helen in the air. The sun was beginning to set when they finally made the last stroke. The painting that emerged was different from anything they had created before. It wasn't just an image, it was a complete story told in colors and shapes. In the center, 3 figures danced amid a whirlwind of brushes and paints, their bodies merging with the very act of creating. "It's her," Marina whispered. "She's here with us." Richard embraced his daughter, his eyes fixed on the painting they had just created together. "She always was." The rising sun illuminated the streets of Chicago when Marina opened the doors of the old studio for another day of classes. The space, now digitally connected with all the other centers of the Institute, maintained its welcoming essence intact. The paint stains on the walls told stories of decades of creation, and the aroma of coffee with cinnamon still filled the air like a trademark. On the main wall, 3 paintings told the story of a family united by art. Helen's last work, Richard's unfinished portrait, and the painting that father and daughter had created together after finding the letter. Beside them, a new addition, the canvas they had painted the day before, still fresh, pulsing with an almost palpable energy. Anna was the first to arrive, as always. Now coordinator of the Institute's digital art program, she had become a bridge between traditional techniques and new technologies. "There's something different here today," she commented, observing the new painting. "It's as if the studio were more alive." Marina smiled, preparing the materials for the morning class. "Sometimes we need to close a circle to begin another." Richard arrived shortly after, carrying a surprise, Helen's old seeds to plant boxes, now filled with new projects and dreams collected from all the Institute's centers. "I found more of her diaries last night," he said, placing the boxes on the table. "Each page is a different project, an idea for the future. Helen really thought of everything. And now we have resources and people to realize each of those dreams," Marina completed, reverently leafing through one of the diaries. The students began to arrive, neighborhood children, young artists, adults rediscovering their creativity. Among them, familiar faces from the first days of the project and new talents discovered along the way. The studio quickly filled with life and movement. That day's class would be special, a collective painting session, simultaneously transmitted to all the other centers of the Institute. On the digital screen installed on the wall, smiling faces appeared in small windows, each ready with their materials. "Today," Marina began, addressing both those present and those connected virtually, "we're going to do something my mother loved: paint without fear, without planning, without judging, just letting the heart guide the brushes." Richard, standing beside her, completed, "As Helen always said, the truest art is born when we stop trying to be perfect and start being authentic." And so, on a sunny morning in Chicago, dozens of people in different parts of the city began to paint together, each with their own style, their technique, their story, but all connected by the same purpose: to keep alive the dream of a woman who believed in the transformative power of art. In the center of the studio, Marina and Richard painted side by side, their brushes dancing over the canvas in a harmony that only time and love could create. Anna, on her tablet, created a digital version of the same scene, a bridge between the traditional and the modern. "Look!" a child suddenly exclaimed, pointing to the window. Everyone turned to see. A rainbow had appeared in the sky, its reflections coloring the walls of the studio like in a giant kaleidoscope. For a magical moment, the colors of the sky seemed to mix with the paints on the canvases, creating a visual symphony that made everyone stop painting to admire. "She's here," Marina whispered to her father. In every brushstroke, in every smile, in every dream realized. Richard nodded, his eyes shining with emotion. "Helen never really left, she just transformed into all the colors we paint." In the recently painted painting on the wall, the 3 figures seemed to dance with renewed energy, as if celebrating each new beginning, each new brushstroke, each new dream about to gain colors. Because true art, as Helen always knew, has no end.